Good afternoon, Rancho Mirage. What a great turnout. You're in for a treat. Originally, I was going to interview our speaker today, and then I had a chance to hear him do his presentation. And I said, you don't need me. You're a force of nature. And he has been the traffic commissioner of America's largest city. He's extraordinary. He survived subway strikes and bridge breakdowns and all kinds of crises. And you're in for a great talk. So I want to remind everyone, tomorrow at noon we have Harlan Coben, one of America's greatest authors here. Again, we're giving the first 600 people get a free book from Harlan. And then on May 6th, we conclude our series with Doug Brinkley, his CNN's presidential historian. His new book is America's Moonshot, and it's a really great book, and look forward to it, okay? So I'm going to introduce you to TJ Hicks, who is in charge of the Rancho Mirage Writer Series program. I'm just happy to sponsor it.
Thanks, Jamie. So that is what I wanted to just take a minute and do, is say a huge thank you to the Rancho Mirage Writers Festival and founder Jamie Kabler. Thank you so much. Free books today for everybody and bringing in these amazing speakers. So let's hear it for Jamie and the festival. So I just wanted to tell you a bit about our speaker today before he comes up. Sam Schwartz is president and CEO of Sam Schwartz Transportation Consultants, a firm that specializes in transportation planning and engineering. In 1980, during New York City transit strike, he was the one that coined the term gridlock, and he is now known as Gridlock Sam. Previously, Schwartz was New York City's traffic commissioner and was the chief engineer of the New York City Department of Transportation. He started his transportation career in the late 1960s as an NYC cabbie and joined the traffic department as a junior engineer in 1971. His book, Street Smarts, The Rise of Cities and the Fall of Cars, and No One at the Wheel, Driverless Cars, and the Road of the Future, lay out a recipe for cities faced with rapid changes in modes, automation, demographic shifts, and travelers' preferences. Schwartz lives in New York City and owns a Volvo that can drive without him. Please help me welcome Sam Schwartz to the stage.
Thank you. Jamie, thank you for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here. TJ, thank you for those remarks. This is a really wonderful group to be in front of. We're going to do a few things today, so you have to brace yourself because we're going to do some time travel. When we're traveling through time, hold on to your chairs just in case. But we're also, part of this presentation, it's very urban, so I know it's maybe a little hard as you ride the streets around here to imagine some of the things that I'm talking about, but I suspect many of you come from cities. So we're going to do a little bit of that time travel. The book, No One at the Wheel, Driverless Cars, The Road of the Future. And the way we do the time travel is something called Zap. And with Zap, we can go back in time to any year that we want to pick. And what you do with Zap is you remove any knowledge you could possibly have since that time. So let's go back and zap ourselves 100 years ago. We would not know anything about the Depression, right? And if it was 1919, you wouldn't know there was a Depression coming. 10 years later, we'd know nothing about D-Day or even World War II. Or for that matter, this newfangled invention called the television set. And we wouldn't even know who this guy was. Okay, I go around the country. In some places I get different reactions, so I was happy with that one. So we're going to do this together. We're going to go to the year 1911, and we're going to be in New York City. So we're going to take a stroll with me in New York City, and you're going to be in the minds of the people that are walking then. You don't know anything about a traffic signal. You don't know about walk signs. You don't know about any rules because you've been a pedestrian for all your life. You've been walking any which way you want. So let's go to New York City, 1911, and you see how the pedestrians are just walking where they want, every direction. Nobody cares. But now imagine if we just told this guy that we're going to shine a light in your face, a red light, and you're going to have to stop. What a crazy concept. Try to put your mind back in 1911 and think someone's going to shine a light in my face and I have to stop, and they shine a different colored light in my face. in my face and I can go. Let me just do that again. I did it a little too fast. And I could start going. And not only that, but when I walk, I have to walk hugging the buildings. And I can only cross at right angles and only if I see that green light. Again, if you're still in 1911, you're going to say that this is crazy. And to top that off, if you don't do that, we're going to throw you in jail. So that's when we started to criminalize something that bipeds did forever, walking wherever they want, whenever they want to do that. So why did we do this? Well, we fell in love with something called the horseless carriage. And the horseless carriage in the advertisements of the turn of last century, they were easy. They were safe. Remember that word, safe. They were clean, elegant, economical. And anyone in the business of planning cities at the time was following this city plan, Le Corbusier, and others who said, and a group of modernists said, a city made for speed is made for success. If you look at the drawings of Le Corbusier and others from then, you will see cities with cars zipping by, but you won't see people. And there were some side effects. It wasn't as great as those advertisements made, and those side effects were apparent almost immediately. And they took the form of people getting killed, mostly children who were playing in the streets. City after city erected monuments. This is in Baltimore, 1922, to the 130 children killed the year before. In St. Louis, in Cincinnati, in New York, there was a demonstration of 1,000 children who had been killed the year before. It was the deadliest period. So why don't we do something about it? We knew in the 1920s that this was pretty deadly contraption. Couldn't we slow them down? Well, we tried. Cincinnati and other cities tried to put something called speed governors. That when you entered the city, you had to slow down. You couldn't go as fast on that. But what did they run into? They ran into a brick wall. And the brick wall was not only the automobile industry, but the modernists who said, are you building a wall around Cincinnati to retard your progress? By 1930, it was all over. The pedestrian lost. And we decided to design all of our roadways to move people as fast as we possibly could, and pedestrians were relegated to second-class citizens, even though for millions of years they ruled the roadways. Did it work? Controlling pedestrians and modern engineered roads solved the problem? No, it's still with us. The safety problem is still very much with us, to the point that today, 3,700 people will die worldwide in motor vehicle crashes. Tomorrow, another 3,700 people will die, and another 3,700 people will die. In the United States, more than 100 people will die today, and tomorrow, and the next day. And I doubt if there is anybody in this audience who is untouched by a car crash in their lives. And somehow we have accepted that. And we accept it in a strange way. We just don't pay attention. There was a terrible crash, which you all heard about just a month ago, when Ethiopian Airlines flight crashed. 157 people died. It was an awful crash. It's in the media today. It was combined with a second crash that occurred. Now, 157 people dying is a terrible tragedy. But when you look at 3,700 people dying daily, that's equivalent to 24 planes crashing every single day. But we don't react that same way. So there's something amiss there, something more that we could do. And there are lots of other side effects. There's 1.35 million people killed annually worldwide. 50 million people have been killed since 1900. 50 million people have ended their lives on this earth through a car crash, through a technology that didn't exist prior to that. And gridlock, yes, I coined the term, please don't blame me for it. I get that too much. Pollution, climate change, sprawl, energy dependency, and so much more. Obesity and inactivity on that. Well, today's talk is going to be about autonomous vehicles, and I go back and do this little history lesson because it's always important when you're going forward to think, have you ever learned anything from another technology or anything like it before? We've had something like this. We have autonomous vehicles that are coming. They are here to some extent, And we have to do better. So what did we learn from the 20th century on it? They are here. You will see them very soon. And we have to do a number of things. So let's talk a little bit about the stages of autonomy, because there's a lot of confusion. The reality is there isn't a single autonomous vehicle that has been created yet that can go everywhere and anywhere and through any kind of weather. So there's illusions that are being created that we have autonomous vehicles traveling about. The vehicles fall under these categories. So the first is safe driving. It turns out autonomous vehicles claim all sorts of safety benefits, but most of those safety benefits can be available now, at least in high-end cars, or within a few years in even many standard cars. So that's safe driving. Autonomous features assist the driving with the task of driving. And I imagine most of you who have a car that was made in the last 5 years have some elements of that. Self-driving, in which a driver can take their hands off the wheel and feet off the pedals in some driving environments, but have to retake control. So when people are saying driverless cars today, these are the cars that they're talking about. Yes, my Volvo, I could put it in self-pilot, take my hands off the wheel, take my foot off the gas pedal, and drive. But then, if it happens to see something it doesn't like or it's confused about, it will start saying, hey, Sam, grab the wheel. And that's called a disengagement. So almost all of the times that people are telling you it's a driverless car, it is an autonomous car, it is not. It is a self-driving car which has the features of an autonomous vehicle. A truly autonomous vehicle, a driverless vehicle, ultimately will be one that doesn't have a steering wheel, doesn't even have a gas pedal. It'll be akin to getting into the elevators. 120 years ago, people wouldn't get into an elevator that didn't have a driver, an elevator operator. Now we all get into autonomous elevators, and we don't have the wheel to turn that elevator. Someday we will have autonomous vehicles like that. We will have some very soon, but in very, very controlled environments. So there's nothing around today that can go in every single environment. So there's no true autonomous vehicle. But while we're going forward, let's figure out how we can get this right, as opposed to what we did last century. And when I started writing the book, it was called Autonomous Vehicles, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And my publisher decided on what I think is a better title, No One at the Wheel, because truly no one is at the wheel, whether it's in government or even in the industry, nobody is at the wheel, and I could talk about that a little bit later. So many good things can happen if we share the vehicles as opposed to individual ownerships, and we integrate with good transit systems. We could see congestion diminish, crashes, injuries, deaths plummet, the disabled, low income, well-served, better equity, less energy used, less pollution, smaller carbon footprint. The last mile, which is the problem in low-density areas or suburban areas, trying to get to the train station, to the bus station, to a trunk line in transit. And parking demand goes way down. What an opportunity for real estate, especially in cities that now have 30% or so of their real estate devoted to parking. Great opportunity. This is the good. Now we move on to the bad. The bad is we do have the shared vehicles, but we compete with transit. And we think the autonomous vehicle can take over for good transit. Remember, I'll always use that adjective, good transit versus bad transit. There is plenty of bad transit out there. So in the bad, congestion gets worse. Lots of jobs disappear. The pedestrians and bikes are squeezed out. There's very little equity in the system, and it reverses the millennial trend in which young people are driving less. And it competes with and undermines existing transit. The ugly, widespread gridlock. We destroy public transportation systems. Heart disease, stroke, diabetes skyrockets. Everybody gets a license, including your dog or your cat. And a new modernist view of cities evolves again. Cities with cars but no people, and encourages sprawl. So how do we move forward in this to get it right? Well, the first thing is to separate what is true and what is hype. There's plenty of hype out there and plenty of people with the hype out there. This is Elon Musk talking to a group of reporters who are asking a bunch of questions, maybe very tough questions. He says if you write an article that's negative, you're effectively dissuading people from using an autonomous vehicle. You're killing people. He's telling reporters, you're killing people if you don't say what I want you to say over here and if you question things on that. Now, out of the other side of his mouth, autonomous vehicles rely on artificial intelligence, AI. If you're not concerned about AI safety, you should be. Vastly more risk than North Korea. So there's a lot of hype that goes on out there, and I'm going to show you something that's terribly unfair for me to show you, especially because I have a science background. I'm going to show you something with very little data. But I have challenged people in the industry, not groups necessarily like this, people that are building autonomous vehicles, who are building the technology for autonomous vehicles, and not one has ever come forward and given me any data. So I call it unfair because it's based on a small amount of data. It turns out nobody is reporting or sharing data in the autonomous vehicle industry. Nobody is reporting when a vehicle in autonomous mode, driverless mode, is crashing. There is one place that they do, and that is the state you're in right now, California. California does lead the way. But there are lobbyists in Washington right now that want to wipe out California's attempt to at least get a handle on some of the data. So the California data, first of all, nationally, the only way we know that 3 people have died is through the media. We don't know, it could be more, and a 4th person died a couple of weeks ago. We don't know yet, we're waiting for the report, if the vehicle was in autonomous mode on that. For 3 people to die, you would have to travel 258 million miles in a conventional car. Autonomous vehicles in autonomous mode have not even come close to 258 million miles traveled. Again, unfair. These are tiny numbers that I'm using, but try to get me those other numbers. Now, when we look at the crash rate, when this is California crash rate, the winner, the leader right now in autonomous vehicles is Google Waymo. They are considered ahead of just about the rest of the pack. I do expect some leapfrogging, but at the moment they're ahead. And in their reports, in which they have to report to the state of California, they are crashing every 55,000 miles. Now, Chevy Cruise, GM Cruise, which is also one of the leaders, is crashing every 12,000 miles. The conventional vehicles that you drive, the average driver, and there may be a lot of good drivers over here, crashes every 500,000 miles. So right now, the first results that are in are not very good, but they're now trying to shut down these results. I believe autonomous vehicles will ultimately be safer because of all the safety features. But if we don't have the data, we can't go forward in a smart way. And one of the takeaways today is take a holistic approach to this. Just don't buy the line, hook, line, and sinker that autonomous vehicles are saving lives, and therefore you shouldn't question anything about autonomous vehicles. And in more of the hype, in the United States, we have a tendency to blame the victim. The US DOT, many DOTs around the country will parrot this particular phrase: humans responsible for 94% of fatalities. Well, if humans are responsible for 94% of fatalities, then it makes sense, take the human out of the equation. Well, maybe there's another approach to it. And in Sweden, they said, let's take a different approach. Let's say humans are fallible. Humans are dumb. Humans drink and drive. They make poor decisions. But let's not give them a death sentence for doing that. So let's protect them at all costs. And that's what we expect from lots of industries, whether it's the railroad industry or it's the airplane industry. We expect them to protect us from ourselves on that. So they call that Vision Zero, which is designing roads, designing cars, designing enforcement programs, designing education programs to get to the point of 0 fatalities. Now, maybe they'll never get to 0, but moving in that direction has succeeded to the point in the past 20 years since they've adopted it, fatality rate has plummeted 62%. So they're almost 2/3 of the way there to that supposed mythical 94%. In the US, our rate is 4 times that of Sweden. So if we just had the Swedish rate, we'd already be at 75% reduction on it. And cars can be safer now, and Sweden is taking the lead, and many others. And high-end cars now have forward collision avoidance. They have automatic emergency braking and lane departure warning and a number of other features. These are the features that you will see that autonomous vehicles are taking the credit for. In other countries, they're making it standard. But here we're saying it's not going to become standard until we have autonomous vehicles. So there's something wrong with that, especially when we see what's happening around the world. 40 countries last month signed an agreement to start making these particular measures, technology, standard in their vehicles. They're starting with automatic emergency braking, meaning if the vehicle detects something in front of it, whether you brake or not, the vehicle will come to a halt. 40 countries have now agreed to this, and they're working on all the other measures that I showed you. 2 countries are absent from that agreement. We're in good company, the United States and China. And there are a lot of other pitfalls going forward. We could very well cut the fatality rate in half, but if we drive twice as much, we're in the exact same place. It is true that the car is one of the least safe ways to travel in terms of rate of death. 653 deaths per 100 billion miles. Even if we knock it down with AVs now by 90%, we'd be at 65, which is not quite as safe as transit, is already 95% safer. So if you're looking for the safer technology today, you don't have to wait for AVs. It's already here. But if we take people out of transit, which is what a lot of the hypists are talking about, get rid of transit, we're actually doubling their fatality rate on a per mile basis. Another mistake we can make. Many studies show if we spend more time in cars, we increase our mortality rate. By the way, a study came out last week. Haven't had a chance to fully analyze it, but it was about measuring how long expectant mothers stay in their cars, their driving patterns. The longer they stay in the cars, the lower the weight of the child that's born. So there's so many health risks in terms of spending too much time in your car. And in the United States, this is the American dream. You sit in your living room, your car is parked right next to you, your child is on your lap, and you're watching cars on the screen. What could be more American than that? Well, the CDC and others, the health community, says it's getting quite dangerous. This is from my previous book, Street Smart, The Rise of Cities, The Fall of Cars. Karen Lee was at the CDC, then the New York Health Department, and says so many preventable diseases can be dealt with just through increased activity. And increasing activity through something called functional activity. If you tell people to go to the gym every day, a lot of people will not do that. But if you incorporate activity by walking during the course of their day, that is called functional activity. Taking the steps every single day rather than taking the elevator at times or an escalator, all those things are functional activity. Now, Hollywood has taken us to carry this to infinity, which I really love, because to try to figure out where you're going, it's so important to try to see the most extreme version. So we had the most extreme version in the film WALL-E. I'm going to run just 45 seconds of it for you. And I love the scene in which the captain who's going to save the day takes one step, and you'd think he just hit the winning goal at the World Cup, you know. But we lose the use of our legs. Now, until about 3 months ago, I said, that's Hollywood. That's an extreme. That's not going to happen. Well, about 3 months ago, I saw a YouTube video put out by Volvo, and I'm going to show it to you, and you'll see. WALL-E is not so far-fetched.
is actually to have an alternative to an office space. So you actually pick up a client, present your work, project it onto the side screen, have a fresh copy, etc. And then we have a bit of fun with a kind of VIP party vehicle that will take you from maybe the client's hotel to a restaurant. And then the fourth one, which for me is the most interesting, is actually an alternative to air travel. Imagine a vehicle that picks you up from your home or work and takes you directly to your destination in another city for the next day.
So in this car of the future, you wake up in your car, you have breakfast in your car, you go to work in your car, you have a meeting in your car, you have a romantic dinner in your car, and then you go to sleep in your car. So how far-fetched was Wall-E? Now, there is an epidemic of inactivity, and it's soon, at the rate it's growing, going to overtake smoking as the #1 killer on the planet. Inactivity is the new smoking, according to some people in the profession, medical profession. You could see 5.3 million people die from obesity and inactivity every single year on this planet. It's about 4 times those that die in motor vehicle crashes. And while it is a couple of the kinds of deaths that you would expect from inactivity, such as heart disease and diabetes, it turns out it's even a bigger killer in cancers, because you're more susceptible to cancer when you're inactive, and your immune system can't fight off the cancers when you're inactive. So actually, 10%, 12% of breast cancer and colon cancer deaths can be attributed to inactivity. And then there's the one that nobody really wants to talk about, and that is cars have been used as instruments of death by terrorists in the last few years. Not cars with IEDs, with explosive devices. Cars themselves just plowing into people. Now, in every one of these cases, there was a driver. The driver was either shot or captured. But now imagine if somebody could do this and have 10 cars doing it at one time in one city and be 6,000 miles away from it, and you'll never capture any individual with it. So there is another reason to go slowly is the counterterrorism community is concerned. And the hacking, there isn't anything that is unhackable to date, and the counterterrorism community has been hacking into just about every vehicle and showing they could gain control of these vehicles. So it is worrisome. Somebody here in California about 3 weeks ago, I happened to read, came out with a book called Civil Terror. I'm not recommending it for your writer's series, Jamie. I don't know if it's any good, but the premise of it is in the state of California, some bad guy gets a hold of 175 cars, autonomous cars, controls them at key points, and the entire state of California is gridlocked. So I don't know much more about it than that. The other promise is, traffic will get better with autonomous vehicles. But no independent analysis is supporting this. The industry will tell you all sorts of wonderful things. But when the analysts look at it, one of the things is that we have a glimpse of the future today, because the autonomous vehicle of the future will be probably an app or something that replaces an app. You call for it, the vehicle arrives and takes you to your destination. Well, all that is Uber or Lyft without a driver. So what has Uber or Lyft done for traffic? Well, it turns out in the state of California and all around the country, it was promised to have less driving, fewer cars out there. Well, it turns out, while it did take 35% of the people that ride Uber and Lyft today do come out of cars, the majority, almost over 2/3, come out of other forms of transportation or added trip. So it has increased traffic congestion in every single city and place that it has been introduced. The other thing, draw your line to the very bottom, for an Uber to pick you up and transport you 1 mile, it arrives empty, leaves you empty, it travels 1.6 miles, or 60% more miles. So right now, the independent analysts are finding more miles are driven with autonomous vehicles if we follow this same model. You will hear time and time again, but they'll follow each other so closely, and we'll have these road trains, which is a real misnomer. These are not trains. These are, one person is in one car, one person is 30 feet ahead. Yes, we could follow a little more closely, but the vehicle in front of that one might be empty, because many of the cars will not have passengers or even drivers, which I call zombie cars. So the capacity can't come close to matching the capacity of a good bus line or a good transit line on it. Buses platooning like this, close together, does make a lot of sense. And there's things called microtransit, which is a company called Via, which I think is now out in Los Angeles, that moves 6 or 7 people in a vehicle. Ford's Chariot, which unfortunately just went under, was transporting 14 people. Microtransit is the answer for a lot of this on it. Now, when we think about the cars of the future, what you're imagining is cars that look today with a little bit sleeker or something else on them. Well, the very first cell phone that I used was in 1982. And I was the city's traffic commissioner, and there was a disaster at 5th Avenue and 42nd Street, and I had to report to the mayor. And rather than go to a phone booth, I had a cell phone, one of the first ones. It came with a man, one of my traffic officers, big guy, and he carried a 12-volt battery with him. He had this huge contraption on top of it. And there I was in the middle of 5th and 42nd Street, crowds around, and I pick up the phone and people gasp. He's calling from the street. It was like an amazing event. Well, the cell phone of today doesn't look anything like that cell phone. So why should the car of tomorrow look like the car of today? IKEA had some fun with it. I just show a couple here. You can go on their website and see others. But it doesn't have to look anything like a car. And the one I like the best is you'll have an app. And instead of going to your Starbucks, you just press the app and your cafe comes to you. It's arriving in 2 minutes. So talk about an inactive society. Now, this may sound like far-fetched, but George Mason University now has a program where you can order coffee and other things, and little robots deliver it anywhere on campus. So you don't even have to leave your room, except maybe to go to class, and even that's a maybe on it. And then there's a really confusing time ahead, and that's almost immediately in the 2020s. You're going to be driving on highways, and you're going to expect the car that you're driving with to behave the same way other cars behave. But all of a sudden, it's doing odd things. And this happened in California. Somebody's getting on a freeway, and there's a car in front of them that's 1,000 feet ahead. So they're going from one freeway to another freeway. And when you're getting on a freeway, somebody's 1,000 feet ahead. You see them 1,000 feet ahead. You're now looking for a gap to get into. You don't expect that person, in this case it was in autonomous vehicle mode, the autonomous vehicle mode couldn't figure out how to push itself into that spot to find a gap. All of you who are drivers know that sometimes you just push yourself into it. So for the second car, had no idea that the first car stopped and crashed right into the first car. So speed differential, by the way, has been shown to be the single closest correlated to traffic crashes. So we're going to have vehicles that obey certain rules, travel at certain speeds, accelerate or decelerate at different speeds than we normally do, and we're going to have a mix of these vehicles on the road. It could be a very deadly period ahead of us, and it could last 30 years, it could last 50 years, but it's not like we haven't been there before. We were there with horses, streetcars, and automobiles from 1900 to 1930, and it was, in fact, the deadliest period on American roads. So how are we going to deal with gridlock in the future? Well, here's 2 images, today and the future, and it may not get any better. Now, cities and towns should be thriving, but not if we repeat the 20th century mistakes, and not if we begin to forget that the pedestrians are the oxygen of the city, are the things that make the city exciting. It's people. It's not the number of vehicles that move through the city. If we don't walk, we lose the vibrancy of cities and towns. Well, walking is the holy grail for the autonomous vehicle industry. This comes from the Toyota 2019 Camry pedestrian detection system. It's got radar, it has vision systems, motor vision systems, machine vision, and these are some of the things that it can't detect or it's not confident. If you're shorter than 3.2 feet, you're a toddler, or you're a basketball player, you're taking a risk. If you're wearing oversized clothing, carrying large baggage, holding an umbrella, bending forward, extremely bright, extremely dark, it would almost be humorous if this wasn't really sad. This is the state of the technology for detecting pedestrians. So pedestrians are a problem, and we can make a mistake. So today, I invited somebody here from 2100, and I'm the only one that could see and talk to her. Her name is Melissa. I'd like you all to say hello, Melissa. Hello, Melissa. Thank you. In the year 2100, Melissa is 85 years old. She was born in 2015. She's my 4-year-old granddaughter. It turns out that if you share, and this is what she gave me, if you share identical genomes that encode neurons, you can then communicate with grandparents. So see if any of your grandchildren have identical genomes that can encode neurons with you, and you'll be able to talk to them way into the future. So she comes back and she says, Grandpa, things are awful in 2100. The climate change has been devastating. Cities have collapsed, and the transportation systems have been a major factor. I know, Grandpa, you're into transportation. Can you tell the people of 2019 what's ahead of them and how we might be able to avoid it? And she said, I'm going to show you a couple of films from the future. So she takes us to 2030. This is a film that was made in 2030. And you could see autonomous vehicles are now out in the street, but the pedestrians know they're going to stop. So they're gaming the system. The autonomous vehicles aren't going anywhere. So what happened? The autonomous vehicle industry then fenced in the pedestrians. So the cars go as fast as possible, and people just had to go through cattle gates. And soon it became no fun to be a pedestrian. People moved out of cities, and again, our carbon footprint went up, pollution went up, and other things went up. So how do we do it right? So Melissa says, do it right, Grandpa. We do it right by selling rides, not cars, integrating with transit. Get the AV industry, which needs our infrastructure, to pay for the infrastructure. It needs really good roads. It needs great signs. It needs roads that don't have potholes or ponding. By the way, Rancho Mirage is a good place. I was talking to Jamie. The little bit that I've seen is you've got some great roads, and they're very well defined. Well, most of America and most cities are not in very good shape, or the shape that you have over here. So who's going to pay for that? Well, this is a nascent industry. Why don't we get them to pay now before they become too powerful and we can't ask them to pay? So 10 cents a mile I'm calling for autonomous vehicles. Utilizing pricing. If the congestion gets too difficult, then utilizing a pricing strategy to reduce the number of vehicles. Maintain and support good mass transit. The lousy mass transit that's out there, which is 90% of this country, replace it with that microtransit that I talked about. And you can get 3 buses for every 1 bus that's autonomous vehicle and offer tremendous service. And emphasize the last mile. That's in the low-density areas. It's the suburban areas. How do you get to that train station or from that train station or that bus station? And equity. One of the things we're terrible about in this country is we introduce new technology, new methods. We introduced bike share, for example, in city after city, and it was the middle class and the more well-to-do that were using it, not the lower economic classes. We approached it in a certain way, and I'm afraid the same thing may happen with AVs. Don't mess with the bike and pedestrian growth. Continue that. What an opportunity with parking that I mentioned earlier. You can build parks, you can build commercial buildings, you can build residential buildings. You shouldn't wait to start thinking about the legislation now and come up with legislation that is protective and allows, if things go wrong, for a local government to impose rules and regulations. We have to develop a counterterrorism strategy. We have to humanize street design. Don't allow this to be an opportunity to do what Southern California tried to do and build its way with as many lanes as possible. And we could do the same thing with autonomous vehicles and have additional autonomous vehicle lanes. And adopt an AV typology plan. What I mean by that is the industry has to agree. If you're going to bring an AV into Rancho Mirage or Los Angeles or San Francisco or New York City, you have to follow the rules of that city. No ifs, ands, and buts. If it's a pedestrian zone, then you can't possibly go into it. That's where the tragedy in the New York terrorist attack last Halloween occurred, in a pedestrian bike zone. If you're in a place where the pedestrians rule, the cars can't go faster than, say, 6 miles an hour. And you've probably seen that especially in European cities. In Queens, where there's a school zone, perhaps 12 miles an hour. You're in LA on Broadway, which is coming back to life, perhaps 18 miles an hour. Champs-Élysées, perhaps 24 miles an hour. And the Autobahn or freeway, whatever speed is appropriate to also deal with energy and safety on it. So I'd like to end with what I consider to be the mobility of the future. So I'm going to unveil it here in Rancho Mirage. Any reporters here, Jamie? I hope not. No. Okay, so you're all going to keep this under wraps because I'm unveiling a new form of transportation. So here it is. Thank you very much. And I think we have some time for questions. So, is there a way to turn up the lights a bit? Good.
We have electric cars, and we have Teslas, and the infrastructure is great. We can drive. We have driven all over the western United States and never had a problem charging at many convenient locations. However, other self-driving cars don't have that infrastructure, and parking lots, if you charge, you get 3 to 8 miles an hour. A supercharger for Tesla, you can get a full charge in 40 minutes. How are all these other autonomous electric vehicles going to compete with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are two paths we could take. One is we can have individually owned cars, and we'll continue to have problems like that. Or there are fleet autonomous vehicles. And in the fleet model, during the nighttime when demand is very low, they can all go to a facility, be charged, and be maintained. So if we go the fleet model, then AV equals EV. And you won't have that problem. The EVs will be charged. And that's really the better model. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have problems that you cite.
What are your thoughts on, thank you. What are your thoughts on Elon Musk's tunnels for transportation?
Okay, tunnels for transportation have been around for so many years. London built its underground in 1865. New York tried in 1868, but didn't fully open it until 1904. So tunnels are a great way to avoid surface traffic. The things that I have seen so far from Musk were for a car to somehow go in below ground and then go on a very fast track and go to a destination. That serves a few people, and it's fraught with so many problems because every single place that you're going to have a gaping hole is going to be tough for that jurisdiction to enforce and keep that absolutely safe. Not that technologically it can't be done. It could be, but it's not for moving large numbers of people. It's for moving small numbers of people very fast. And so I don't see it being an answer at all to urban traffic problems. Maybe on that side?
You've touched on personal transportation in automobiles, but you haven't spoken at all about commercial transportation with semi-trucks and box trucks, and those seem to me to be potential problems.
Yeah, and they're also potential winners. There's both. You could put, the technology is getting so good, and I'll say we're there pretty soon, that you could put a truck on a highway in California and it can end up 2 days later in Boston and not have a driver on it. You'd have to charge or have some kind of fuel source through it. But riding on freeways is one of the easiest things for autonomous vehicles to do. It's when you mix with pedestrians and mix with bike riders and scooters and everything else out there that it gets to be a problem. You could also platoon these vehicles, so you've seen articulated trucks or the very long trucks. You could put a little bit of a truck train, maybe 2 or 3 together. You can't put 10 together just because of the aerodynamics. If you're coming in the opposite direction, you get hit with an incredible amount of air. Your small vehicle will go flying on it. So you could put 2 or 3 trucks together and they could run like a platoon cross country. What were you worried about with the trucks?
On city streets, particularly out here, we've had a rash of pedestrian deaths and bike riding deaths.
Yeah, it's sad, and I hear this all over the United States. And the truck deaths are often when there's turning vehicles with pedestrians, if that's what the ones that you've been talking about. There are also head-on or right ends with trucks that also cause fatalities. Many of those could be avoided with some of the technology that I talked about, with really good pedestrian detection system, automatic braking systems, and the same thing to protect a lot of bike riders. The technology is just not quite there yet. You saw some of the ones that could not be read accurately by the Toyota Camry. So when a truck or any vehicle leaves a freeway, then the probability of a crash goes way up until we can deal with it. And we will at some point in the future.
Sam, thanks. This is the most measured presentation I've seen on this subject. How, with the susceptibility to this subject to lobbying, which it is highly lobbied, how do you plug in government and politics of getting anything done?
You know, I really wish I had a good answer to that. In October, the Trump administration came out with something called Autonomous Vehicles 3.0. And it's the guidelines for how the country should go forward. And the guidelines essentially say states, which you had control over vehicles all these years, and we know the administration believes in states' rights. In this particular case, it says states get out of the way. Cities get out of the way. What's good for autonomous vehicles is good for America. And I'm really frightened that we're going to be dictated by the federal government, that we can't impose any rules or regulations, and there is absolutely no requirement of reporting. Imagine we release a drug and we're not going to report anything about that particular drug. Here, by design, we report nothing when it comes to autonomous vehicles, and the federal government is relying on what the industry thinks is best. And it has the last line in it that's kind of odd, but not from this administration. And it says, but driving is an American freedom. I think it was in the Constitution somewhere that you could drive your car, but that's just what it says over there. So those of you worried that your steering wheels are going to be taken away, I think people already have some hats that Make America Drive Again on it. So, okay, somebody all the way in the back.
I'm going to ask a very selfish question. It may apply to others in this room. I'm 76.
Can you raise your voice a little?
Okay. I'm going to ask a very selfish question. Others in this room may share my concern. I'm 76. My independence in this low-density area depends on the mobility I get from being able to drive. I don't want to depend on an Uber or a Lyft. I'd rather just take a car from home to a doctor, to a grocery shopping, or whatever. How close are we to being able to fulfill this independence need for me, 76 years old.
With an autonomous vehicle?
With an autonomous
Okay.
vehicle.
If you remember, the good use I talked about was with elderly, with people with disabilities, and here in California, nearly 750,000 people can't drive because of visual impairment, about 2 million due to physical impairment. Now, just what a wonderful thing that we'll be able to move those people in cars, but now we may have 2 million more cars on the roads here in California. The good use of this is for people, elderly people, people who can't drive anymore, people with disabilities. That's a winner. And that's where you're not being selfish. That's where this should be going. It should be going for those people, and I'm soon there. I'm just a couple of years behind you. And it should go for other people who can't drive for whatever reason. It should go for autonomous transit, and where trucking makes sense for autonomous trucking, not the individually owned autonomous vehicle. Bill Ford said if we follow the path that we're on with autonomous vehicles, and he's executive chairman of Ford Motor Company, and I've met with him, a true environmentalist, and he's quoted, I use him in my book, he said, if we continue the path we're on, we're going to have global gridlock by 2050. He recognizes we need a new model. Ford changed its name from the Ford Motor Car Company to Ford Mobility, or at least they're in the process of working on that. So there are good uses, what you describe as a good use for autonomous vehicles going forward. And when? In a place like Rancho Mirage, sooner than almost any other place because of the great infrastructure you have over here. You rarely see, when I go to cities around the country, I rarely see infrastructure in such good shape. There's a lot of reasons you don't get much snow down here and others, but yes.
Do scooters play a part in that last mile?
Yeah. So scooters, if you haven't been following things, scooters were the kids' toys, but now they are electric, and you could travel in some cases 18 miles an hour, some jurisdictions, maybe 20 miles an hour, and so that last mile will take you 3 minutes to go, and so scooters might be a good form of transportation. I don't believe we'll have autonomous scooters, although I must tell you, last April Fool's, the one before last, somebody put out a Google autonomous bicycle, and I fell for it when I was first looking at it. So I don't think we'll see autonomous scooters, but yeah, they play a role. We just haven't figured out the safety impact. Such anger has popped up over the scooters for a couple of reasons. One, people are getting hurt, but we're blaming the scooters as opposed to the other vehicles that are on the road. And the second thing is that the model that's been used is largely take the scooter wherever you want and then leave the scooter. And so scooters have been massing. There are some cities around the world that have just collected all the scooters and threw them in the garbage. But they're growing really fast, and they do have a role in transportation. And we need to make things friendlier for people that are biking or scootering or hovering, whatever it is. But again, when we're working on that last mile, there is a form of technology that also works pretty well, and those are your shoes. And that's even healthier. About 2 years ago, I got an email, and it was one of the most intriguing emails. And it was signed H.B. Siegel, Prime Minister of Ideas at Amazon. Now, how can you resist a meeting with the Prime Minister of Ideas at Amazon? So I said, I'm going. And he wanted to get some people together to solve urban transportation. So I was there with Uber Elevate, where you press a button and a vertical takeoff and lifting takes you, to another destination. I was there with people who were doing kind of the Musk, the Hyperloops and others, and then people who figured out ways of the electric scooters, greater mobility. And when it came my turn, that's where I got the idea for this. I said, what about your feet? You're trying to walk 1 mile, 2 miles? Your feet can do a pretty good job in doing that. So I wasn't invited back the next year. Until they go in the shoe business, then I'll be back. Okay, I'm sorry, over there.
First of all, thank you for your time. My name is Ray, and I want to move away from surface streets, the city environment, and take us out to the 10 freeway, which in my opinion is out of control. It's a raceway. The speed out there, 70 is the speed limit, but that's slow. And cars and semis are traveling well over 80, 85, 90, and I have seen some cars going over 100. I was out there one evening, and it's about 9 o'clock, and I'm driving 75 miles an hour, not in the fast lane, but semis, double trailers are passing me, like if I'm standing still. And so, because we travel the 10 frequently, I was telling my wife, I think that the only way, and I feel sorry for the Highway Patrol, that they could regain control is with cameras, with radar, where tickets could be sent out to regain control because people are dying. It's dangerous. And so as far as the cameras with radar where tickets could be sent via the internet or the mail, what is your opinion? Is this a foolish idea?
No, there are two things that have worked in slowing people down short of putting a cop everywhere. The first one is design. If you make the lanes much narrower, people drive more carefully, they don't drive as fast. So in California, there is the Caltrans standard of at least 12-foot wide lanes, which came about because Eisenhower wanted to move tanks back and forth on the interstate, which was called the Interstate Defense Network many years ago. You don't need such wide lanes. They encourage speeding. But the other technology that has worked to control speeding are, indeed, cameras. The downside of the cameras is you can't give the driver a ticket. There's no points on the license. It's the cost of doing business. But the cameras have been effective, far more effective than just about any other technology.
We probably got time for just about one more going here.
I was wondering how accurate is the GPS system that provides the input for these autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, as long as it's getting all the signals, and as long as nobody's playing with it, it's very accurate. It knows where you are. It should know the street directions. It should be able to put you on the right side of the street. It's not perfect. So, for example, an Uber in Pittsburgh turned down on autonomous, went the wrong way on a one-way street. It's not there yet, but at some point it's going to be close to perfect.
The government used to introduce errors in the GPS system.
You've detected errors?
No, they used to introduce errors because they were worried about ICBMs being very accurate. So they actually put an error in the system. But today, I guess it must be gone.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I followed that. Somebody puts an error in the system?
Yeah, they were worried about the Russians sending a missile.
Oh, yeah.
Going in.
Sure. Yeah, I know. Hackers have already gotten into virtually every kind of autonomous vehicle that has been created, and many of those are the good hackers hired by government. Thank you very much.
Thank you.